Here's a poem by our guest today, Dr. Mary Swander.
Yet here at Red Fern Farm, next to the chestnuts and persimmons, the pawpaws bear witness. Greet Bosnians who crossed the ocean, fleeing war, recreating their old world custom of picking nuts in the fall. The Bosnians pull into the U-Pick farm in their vans with buckets and baskets. Their vehicles fill with just a little of what they left behind. The nut wizard whirls across the ground beneath our feet in this ever-shifting place, tree roots sinking in, communicating through an intricate web of fungi, growing around inside them, telling the dirt to stay put, stopping it from washing downriver, from carrying harm, finding no one hungry, nothing displaced.
Thank you, Mary. What's the title of that poem?
Red Fern Farm.
Red Fern Farm, and that's an excerpt from it, correct?
That's an excerpt. It's a much longer poem, and
that's wonderful.
I was asked to write a poem by a project called Writing the Land, this working with land trusts. And this farm, which is not too far from where I live, it's near the Mississippi River, is in a trust that it will be preserved as a perennial farm forevermore.
Forever and ever.
Yeah, and so the Writing Land Project matches poets with land trust. So I've made many trips there and learned the history of the place and exactly what they're doing. It was a corn and soybean farm that magically got transformed into a nut fruit farm, tree farm. They have a garden, but it's only perennials. So it's asparagus, horseradish, sorrel, that kind of thing. It's
what we call specialty crops. Yeah,
right,
high value specialty crops. Cool. Well, I'm hoping that we'll have Lise McLaughlin on as an interviewee here before too much longer about Writing the Lands, an activity that you've been very actively involved in for some time and that I'm just beginning to tune into. Let me introduce to everyone how pleased I am to introduce Dr. Mary Swander. She's the artistic director of Swander Women Productions, a theater troupe that performs dramas about food, farming, and the wider rural environment. She's also the director of an incredibly cool initiative called AgArts. It's a nonprofit designed to imagine and promote healthy food systems through the arts. We'll be talking more about AgArts here in just a few minutes. She's also the former Poet Laureate, a former Poet Laureate of Iowa, and is an award-winning author. She's been given grants by the National Endowment of the Arts. She's published scores of books of poetry and nonfiction in essays, in magazine articles, and in individual poems and radio commentaries. Her work has been showcased on National Public Radio, Poetry Magazine, the New York Times Magazine, and on and on. She's also a playwright. So she just has all sorts of writing credentials to bring forward. She is also a retired Emerita Distinguished Professor of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Iowa State University, where she taught for 30 years in the creative writing program there. And she's had residencies at all sorts of writing colonies and programs around the US. So Mary, it's just a terrific pleasure and honor to have you here to talk with you for a few minutes about your work in poetry and writing and the arts, especially, and the rural environment, especially the farming environment, and that mashup. Is there anything about your background that I failed to mention that you'd like to point out?
I think you did a good job of introducing me.
Okay. Well, your bio is very, very amazing, and truly, it's like I said, it's really a special joy to have you here. Let me ask you a little bit about this amazing program that you started, I believe, about a decade ago called AgArts. Why did you found it, or why did you establish it? And what have been some of the cool programs that have occurred as a result of AgArts?
Well, I was walking across the campus one day with Fred Kirscherman. This was at Iowa State. He was the director of the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, and we'd become friends. And he said, I know we're kind of odd bedfellows, but don't you think we could have an organization with agriculture and the arts? And I was just like, ding, what a great idea. And so it started at Iowa State in a small way, basically with students, community members. And then when I retired, I brought it with me to eastern part of Iowa, made it into a 501c3, and then started developing residencies where I put artists on farms.
You put artists on farms. This is a wonderful concept.
So they live on a farm, usually with the farm family. Some of the farms have separate buildings. It's all different.
Sure.
I have about 6 farms, and it's all different configurations. But I didn't want artists to just go there and hole up and do the usual thing and come out with 10 poems later or something. That
Right.
I mean, it's fine. I want them to get their work done. But it's also an educational process where I really want them to understand what a farm is and what the challenges are, and then reflect those issues in their artistic work to try to reach a wider audience and make them, have a different point of view. Most of the artists who have gone to farms have some kind of affinity with it, or they wouldn't be interested in the program. There may be 2, now 3 generations removed from the farm. They might be master gardeners. They have, they have an interest in what's going on there. But, I'm getting comments like, I never knew there were all those tubes that run under the ground, and I'm like, what tubes? What are you talking about? Oh, tile. We call that tile. And they're like, why do they have all those tubes, Mary? And I'm like, with it, that's draining, the swamp, essentially. A huge chunk of Iowa was swamp, and now we're farming on that. And they're like,
Right.
oh, wow. And so they're beginning to think of the landscape in different ways. Of agriculture is more than just going to the store and seeing if your eggs cost more that week.
Right.
And understanding the squeeze that family farmers have been, under. Well, they've been under squeeze forever.
Right.
But basically, the Depression was a huge squeeze, and then we had the farm crisis in the 80s, which was just gigantic squeeze. And now the people that are still farming in a family farm situation, or they're trying to begin farming, have these unique financial pressures upon them. And I want people to get that, to understand that. And so it's working, and they're creating artwork in response to this.
Yeah. So having the artistic community, and I think I can say that your artistic community includes certainly writers, poets, but also visual artists. And I think you were even telling me dancers and
upcoming, I have a residency for a juggler sword swallower.
There you go. Yeah.
There you go.
So you're raising their understanding by literally dropping them into a farm family and a farm community, raising their understanding about the farm environment, so to speak, social and physical environment. How about the farmers? Are their appreciation of the arts being changed or elevated as well?
That's the other side of it. They've been very welcoming. They've gotten an insight in how much hard work goes into the arts and how much time you need to do it, and how artists respond to things in their environment, how they have performances or exhibits, or these last 2 years we've done it all online, how that works.
Mm-hmm.
and how they might join in is really, it's really been fun. Like,
Cool.
I've had farmers step forward and say, I have a theater in my barn. I can't tell you how many farmers have come to me with that. And I'm like, a theater. And then, I go and look at it and it's just fully developed theater with light, sound. I mean, just really,
Wow.
yeah. And I'm like, what, how did this happen? And they're like, well, I've always been interested in theater and we don't have much to do in January. And, so I just come out here to the barn, start fiddling around. And, so I'm really interested in getting performances into these barns, which I have done. And it's just really fun. The last person I worked with was a Laotian refugee farmer. And he built a whole complete stage out of old pallets. And it's just beautiful. Wow. And he performs there, and I'd love to have other shows of different kinds. And he has recreated a traditional Laotian farm, from Laos on his farm.
On his farm. Wow, yeah. Amazing. And you have had poets involved as well. It sounds.
Oh yeah, no, poets are really, you really take to it because
and the work that they've produced, have you been able to use that in any, or have they been able to use that, or have the farmers been able to use that work at all?
Oh, they have. Actually, I'm gathering together. I'm trying to do like an online anthology.
Cool.
Yeah. And I don't know if I've had the money to do the whole, paper book. We'll see.
Hard copy.
Yeah, hard copy. But I think I could do an online anthology really easily.
Oh, that would be so cool.
So to gather those together and put them on our AgArts website, which is AgArts.org.
There you go, AgArts, onephrase.org. And I would encourage people to check it out. It's a great website where Mary has all sorts of results of these residencies posted. And she has blog posts and stories. And it's just a fascinating way to kind of bridge I hate to say it this way, but I call it kind of a social, maybe even political divide that we are experiencing in this country, particularly the suburban, maybe even urban point of view and the rural point of view, and giving an opportunity to both to experience and understand and then express a little bit of that understanding through these residencies.
No, that's it. That's one of the bigger goals is to bridge that urban rural divide, which is, I've moved back and forth around in those different groups my whole life, but most people haven't. And they have all these stereotypes, preconceived notions about the other side. And, I thought, well, we got to break this down.
Yeah. You have dual citizenship. You're both a US and Irish citizen, which I think is terrific, cool. And speaking of Ireland, tell us a little bit about AgArts and its international dimensions. Are you beginning to branch out and host artists from overseas?
Absolutely. The first residency I did, which I wanted to do with a real bang, I brought over 2 Irish musicians, and they stayed on a farm on the Mississippi River.
I bet they were popular.
They were a huge hit. And, and the Mississippi to them is very emblematic. And then I toured them all over the state, and the place they wanted to go were the bridges of Madison County because of the movie. It's funny what both sides, think is
preconceived notions. Yes.
Well, yeah. But I took them to small towns, cafes, opera houses all around the state, and we had packed houses and audiences. And then we had little pop-up concerts, like the farm was near Dubuque, Iowa, and they played at the homeless shelter. And they had been to the States, but like most Irish, they come to New York, or they might come to LA or something. They never get in the middle. And they, their eyes were just bugging out. They had never, ever seen anything like, an Iowa cornfield. They were just like, it's so big.
Yeah.
And vast. So we have we have a video on the AgArts website of their residency. And so that was great. And, you know, and I actually had brought, I think about 3 or 4 other groups of Irish artists that I'd toured around the state after that. And then the pandemic hit. So
Yeah.
that kind
Yeah.
of was tough. And,
Sure.
but now it's getting a little bit better. And I'm having, like last week, I had an email from a woman from India who's a Fulbright scholar, and she wants to come to write a book about women farmers. So
Oh,
I'm
wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm working on a residency for her. I'm like, that's perfect. I'll just put her on one of the farms where the woman is running the farm, or there's women that farm alone. And that's just, you know, remarkable.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I'm excited about that. I think this international aspect will be great. Or, you know, also people from different parts of the country.
Yes.
You and I were on a call last week where I think she lives in Maryland, friend of
Yes.
yours. And
Patty
she said,
Ross.
Pat, yeah, she's like, you know, I'm African-American, we're interested in urban farming. And I thought, oh, I have an urban farm. Let's bring her out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are all kinds of farms. There's a diversity of farms as there is a diversity of farmers. Well, I cannot congratulate you enough for blazing this very important trail. I don't know of anyone else who has made as much of a difference and will continue to make that kind of difference in this really important and often overlooked realm of the rural and the artistic. I just think other than maybe quilts, and I don't mean to belittle quilts, but other than quilts, you know, I think there's just not a full appreciation of how the creative expressions can help and reinforce and further understand the rural environment. I would like to drill down in our last few minutes here together to as a former poet laureate, you obviously have all kinds of expertise, interests, and insights into what I call the power of poetry. How do you think, for our Poetry X Hunger fans and followers, how do you think poetry can be used to speak back to hunger? Any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, I think it's a unique voice. It's a voice that people are drawn to, that will listen to, you know, what I've found addressing, I've done a lot of work with food insecurity talks and so forth. And, you know, you can get up on your soapbox and talk about it. And, you know, people kind of go, yeah, not it. But if you present it in a poem, in an artistic expression that actually touches people's emotions and draws them in, then they'll actually respond. You know, what I think is so interesting is we think of hunger as something far away from us, right?
It's
You
not
know,
at all.
in you know, in a country in Africa or whatever.
Yeah, right.
And I found hunger everywhere. I found hunger in my students.
Yes.
You know, didn't have enough money for food. They were trying to get an education. I found hunger in the immigrant community. I found hunger in my neighbors who are family farmers who are on food stamps. You know, hunger is everywhere when
It
you
is
start
everywhere. Yes.
looking.
Yes.
And if we could express that, if we could capture that as moments and dramatize them for our fellow human beings to, you know, have a window into that, you know, I think that's what the role that a poet, you know, could do. And there's, you know, there's stigma to it. There's all sorts of, you know, negative connotations. All it means is you don't have the money, you know, to get food.
Sure.
For whatever reason. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in rooms of scientists who were discussing how to, you know, address the food insecurity issues through better technology, better methods, and those are all incredibly important discussions. Right. And they were also citing, as you were just mentioning, all kinds of statistics and trend lines, all very important. But when I invited a young African-American poet to stand up and present in kind of a, not slam, but definitely presentation mode poem about hunger, I've never seen my science colleagues look up, put their pens down or their laptops down, and actually tune in. As you say, it kind of can grab the heart and
Right.
actually, I think, move folks to action. So I'm not saying that we need poetry instead of all of
Right.
the other work that's being done, but we need to include it in our toolkit. And up until fairly recently, there just wasn't that much poetry that had been written about hunger. So I'm
Isn't that
so
amazing?
pleased. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
so pleased that you have found the same sort of situation as you've worked with the poetry community. Well, Mary, I'd like to promise and threaten to come back to you in the upcoming months to check in with you to see how things are going with AgArts and all the other activities you're involved with. But this has been just delightful to hear about your really innovative work, especially with those artist residencies
Yeah,
on
they're really important.
farms. I just think that is so, so cool. So any closing thoughts from you, anything that we haven't covered that you really want to make sure is mentioned?
Well, if you're an artist or a farmer and you're interested in a residency, just get on the AgArts website. There's a form to fill out to apply. I'll give you a call. We'll discuss it. I have farms not only in Iowa, but right now I have a farm in New York State. So it's not just confined to the Midwest. And I frankly would love, my vision would be to see it all over the world.
Hmm,
In maybe 10 years from now.
sure,
And
sure.
so let's get cracking here on it.
Cool, cool. And you've been able to offer these residencies even in spite of COVID, correct?
We worked it out. We during COVID, I have one farm that just has a separate house,
Yep.
and it's thoroughly cleaned, but you don't you're not in the farmer's house. Many of them are like that. So I just used that house in the big surges of COVID. And then now I have a couple others that have separate buildings, and we're going that way. Then when things lighten up, we'll put them back with the
Right.
farm. When you're in a separate thing, you miss a lot of the
Well,
interaction.
sure. It does have its challenges, but there might even be some benefits as well. You're certainly learning how to put these folks together in new and innovative ways. Well, Mary, I have 2 words for you as we close out. And those 2 words are keep going.
Thank you, Ira. I
Thank
really admire what you're doing too. It's great that we have met up.
Yeah, I'm grateful to Lise McLaughlin for introducing us. So we'll sign off for now, but with the hope that we'll be able to get back together and hear updates about all your cool work.
Oh,
Thanks
thank you
so much, Mary.
Okay, take